The second most popular triad in cybersecurity, right behind the CIA Triad, is the AAA Triad. Now, these are simply different ways of looking at the same thing. They're different perspectives. When you classify something, you have various ways that you can classify it. For example, I collect dice. I know that's kind of an odd hobby, but I can classify those dice by the materials they're made of. I could classify them by colors. I could classify them by how many facets they have on them. You know, is it a 6-sided die or a 4-sided die or a 20-sided die? I could classify them by whether they have spots or numbers or pictures. I have a number of ways that I can classify them. Now, any classification system I use includes all of the dice. It's just a matter of a different perspective, and that's the case here. The AAA Triad is a different perspective from the CIA Triad, but they both describe all of security in a manner of speaking. But the AAA Triad is more of a how-to model that sort of supports the CIA Triad. You'll see what I mean as we go along. So they mean authentication, authorization, and accounting. And again, you notice that I put it around data. That's the thing we're ultimately trying to protect. Authentication simply means proving you are who you say you are. Now, again, this sounds like a person, but it could be a system. Systems also have to prove they are who they say they are. So, for example, if you're on a network at work, your computer and the server are constantly authenticating to each other to prove that they are who they say they are, so that if a bad guy's computer gets in the mix, the server will know that this is not the good guy. And likewise, if a bad guy pretended to be the server, your computer would know this is not the real server. So authentication also takes place between systems. This is often broken up into two sub-steps. The first being identification. That is the statement of who you are, your username, for example. And then the authentication step itself, which would be such as the password, the proof. Now, I know that proof is a strong word. We could get into a philosophical discussion about it, but we will not do that. Let's just say that instead of proof, we'll just say it's very strong evidence. All right, we know that it could be hacked, but it's very strong evidence anyway. And by the way, we are going to go into all three of these things in very, very much more detail in later lessons, in later discussions. There is a lot more to say about authentication and such things as the factors of authentication and so forth. But we'll get into that not in this video, but in later videos. The next is authorization. Authorization occurs after authentication. It's what you are allowed to access after establishing authentication. So always remember that authorization follows authentication. Authentication must occur first. Just because a person is who they say doesn't automatically give them the right to just access anything. So just proving you are who you say you are doesn't necessarily give you the right to access certain data. Here's an analogy I came up with, that a driver's license may establish your identity, but that does not give you the right to drive an 18-wheeler truck. Right? You also have to have a CDL for that. So just establishing you are who you say you are doesn't mean that you have access to just any data that you want. And so this is a second step beyond authentication. Authorization is usually done through things like access control lists, for example. We'll get into that again later on in much, much greater detail. The third is accounting. Accounting has to do with logging events on the system, logging the access of users to resources on a system. This provides tracking for legal purposes, for company policy enforcement. It provides evidence of attempted unauthorized access. So if the bad guy keeps trying to break into a system, I have a record of that, and I have some evidence that it's occurring. It provides non-repudiation. If I have good logs of what happens on the system, you can't deny that you did something, that you accessed a system that maybe you were not supposed to be accessing. So that's accounting, and it has to do with logging of events.